Hello, nerds. Good evening, and welcome to Nerd Night 41.5 Rerun. Ready for some thinking and drinking? What are you drinking? I'm drinking, strawberry and vanilla soda that I made myself using carbonated water from a soda stream and a fruit tea and some sweetener. It is delicious. Not alcoholic because I'm recording this in the middle of the afternoon on Thursday. So yeah, not drinking, not doing any heavy drinking yet. Anyway, we're coming to you, obviously not live from Tokyo, Japan. Not live, but not dead either. You might say undead or whatever. Maybe the distinction doesn't matter to you. You're at home. I'm at home. Why? Well, because we don't want to catch and throw COVID-19 at each other all night. Instead, we'll be bringing this not-so-live cast of three of our favorite previous Nerd Night speakers. These are pre-recorded talks, and we will just send them out. I should apologize. I'm a bit croaky tonight. I've come down with a lung infection, which is not COVID-19, or who knows, maybe it is. Not like they're testing anybody. In any case, as you can hear, it's done a number on my throat. I sound like that teenage character from The Simpsons. Oh my God, the oil's so hot. Forgive my croakiness. On behalf of Nerd Night Tokyo, on behalf of Nerd Night Tokyo, no, that's not what I want to say. On behalf of Nerd Night Tokyo co-boss Amanda and the rest of the team, thanks for joining us here, and we hope to see you back at Grid in the near future, but not in April. Breaking news, this just in. We will get a May date to you pretty soon. So for April, maybe we'll do another one of these. If this is successful, or maybe something that's like this, but actually with new talks. We'll see. We'll see what we can figure out. Just a quick shout out to our regular volunteers. Just to thank them for always being around. Joan, Ian, Bruce, Coco. Why am I counting on my fingers? I don't know. Rio, Selena, and of course, Dawn Warren, human, with the occasional sprinkling of Kai and Melvin. So we're going to run the talks. I'm just going to play the talks as usual tonight. Unlike our videos that we normally post on YouTube, I am going to include the Q&A, the original Q&A. But instead of the usual 20-minute break between speakers, because that's a bit painful when you're watching a live stream, we are going to do a 7-minute break, mostly so people can get up and get another drink, so you can go to the washroom and relieve yourself of the previous drink, or so you can just contemplate and enjoy some existential dread that I know we've all been feeling a lot of lately. Anyway, I've talked too much. Oh, I'm croaking again. I talked too much. On with the show.
Hey, I've seen this one. This is a classic. This is where Ralph dresses up as the man from space.
What do you mean you've seen this? It's brand new.
Yeah, well, I saw it on a rerun.
What's a rerun? I'm in good shape.
So, this is Yuri Kimura. She is the curator of vertebrate paleontology at the National Museum of Nature and Science in Tokyo. Her current research is on evolutionary history and paleoecology of terrestrial mammals, especially small mammals in Asia. And she has this really cool
Smile-on t-shirt.
saber-tooth t-shirt on.
Yeah.
She's going to tell us how the Gobi Desert became a mecca for paleontology, and her talk is dedicated to all the modern explorers who came to Japan for their dreams.
Yeah.
Take it away, Yuri.
Thank you. So it's not super dinosaur talk, but I think you will enjoy it. Can I start? Okay, so I'm Yuri Kimura, a museum scientist at the National Museum. Very happy to be here to celebrate the 30-year anniversary of Nite Tokyo. And you are here in Tokyo, which means that you got your own passport, you took a flight to come all over to Japan, and you may be in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. You were in the middle of an adventure, right? So there's a guy who did that about 100 years ago, and I'd like to share my favorite adventure story with you. The guy on the left is Indiana Jones, and he's an archaeologist. He takes all the risks to discover archaeological sites and then find an artifact and destroy all of them. And he's a movie character, but he was actually inspired by a real guy who is on the right, Roy Chapman Andrews. He later became president of American Museum of Natural History, but he came here in Japan about 100 years ago. So Roy was born in Wisconsin in 1884, and as a kid, he really loved exploring. And as a kid, he was already attached to the life of adventure and explorer. He enjoyed exploring waters and forests as a kid, and also he gained the skill of taxidermy in a teen. So after graduating from the college, he went to New York to find a position in a museum. And getting a position in a museum is really tough, and not so much position available in the museum. So he couldn't get a position, but he became a janitor so that he can be in a museum. But with his social characters and the skill of taxidermy, he was really, he started going to the labs and become a lab assistant. So now from a janitor to the lab assistant, and his first job was to retrieve North Pacific right whale stranded in the coast, and then he remodeled the whale for the museum. So that was his job, and that's how he started getting knowledge about whales, cetology. And with this deep knowledge of the cetology, he was asked, because he had a very deep knowledge, he was asked to join to adventure, the research ship called Albatross. This time, there's no commercial flight, so he came to Japan with a ship, long trip. And then he stopped by Yokohama first, and that was his first Asian country that he have ever seen. And then on the way, their trip was actually going to Philippines and then Micronesian islands. And on the way back, he stopped by Nagasaki, where he saw whale meat in a commercial market. And that's how he got the idea to stay in Japan for a while to get whale specimens for the museum in Japan. So he traveled all over the places in Japan like that, and stayed there for about 10 months, from his 25 years old to 26 years old. So you might be about the same age. And he also came to our museum, which I didn't until I prepared for this talk. Yeah, so he saw beaked whales hanging in an exhibition, the old exhibition in our museum, and apparently that's a very rare specimen for them, and he wrote about that in Science, the journal Science, and then I was quite surprised to see this. And then so he started his career under the whale cetology, studying whales, but he's very famous for Central Asiatic expedition. This is world's largest expedition and the best equipped and the largest expedition which ever done in the land-based expeditions. So that was conducted in 1922 to 1930s, 8 years. And this expedition was very unique. This was his idea. He used both automobiles and the camel caravans. 100 years ago, there's no gas station in Mongolia. Probably very less gas stations still now. But because there's no gas station and he used automobiles to explore a large area, extensive area, he needed to carry gasoline with him. And that's why he used camel caravan. So the camel caravan goes earlier time and then carry food and all the equipment and the gasoline. And then later, researchers and others followed this caravan by automobile, and they met on the location. And just imagine how hard it is without cell phone and GPS. So this is the real photos from the expeditions. So because they use automobiles, really extended area was covered by these expeditions. 1922, they really did a very large expedition like that. And then what they found was this, the dinosaur eggs. Now we know that the dinosaur is born from the eggs, but this time dinosaur eggs wasn't discovered yet. So it's just a hypothesis that they probably born from the egg, but this wasn't actually solid evidence. And because of this dinosaur egg, which was found on the very first year of their exhibition, then Andrews became really, really famous, and then they really did good jobs in the following years. But dinosaur isn't really their main purpose, because they wanted to find the theory, the evidence for the theory of Henry Fairfield Osborn. You might not know this scientist, but if you know the dinosaur on your right, then you know him. Tyrannosaurus Rex was described by Osborn. Osborn had this hypothesis that an origin of mammals should be in Asia. Not only just the origin, the mammal lineages, but maybe human origins is in Asia. Now we all know that in Africa is the origin of humans, but that time either Africa or Asia, either places was a possibility. And then they trying to find the evidence for that. So the dinosaur egg, so yeah, this was great, and people loved the dinosaur egg, but this is not exactly what they wanted to find. So they wanted to find the younger deposits, because dinosaur is a Cretaceous time, and then mammals is after the dinosaurs, Paleogene time. So they start going the eastern side, and as you see the year, and in 1928, they finally found a younger deposit, which they believe the human time deposits. It's actually a little bit older, and the site is called Wolf Camp because they had a lot of wolf in this camp. And see here, there's a very nice bones right here. But I also found this on a picture. I was quite amazed. They have this coffee. They're using this coffee can for expeditions. I don't know how they used. But this fossil I just picked up and turned around and make it larger. And this is a lower jaw of this extinct mammal called the Platybelodon. It's an ancient elephant. The current elephant only have two long tusks in the maxilla, but in older time, about 15 million years ago, there's a lot of different kind of elephants, and the one elephant lineage called the Gomphotherium have a longer jaw and also have a long tusks like this. So this elephant is called shovel jaw. I forgot. You can probably check on Wikipedia. Anyway, this is one of my favorite Platybelodon. So in 1930s, they were able to conduct the same field in the same sites and then get a lot of platypelodon fossils. So this was very good for them as an indicator for younger deposits, and they might be able to find a human origin, evidence for the human origin. But a year later, Manchuria incident happened. So now you know because those instability, political instability started. So his fascination started with Japan, started in Yokohama and Nagasaki, but now he had to end this expedition. And then Japan was Japan kind of did that. And as time goes by, people's memory getting fainting. And then now Japan is recovering from the World War II, but China was still in instability, political instability. So people's memory started really getting fading away. Now wolf camp is completely lost. You can see in the paper, but nobody knows the exact site. So in 1990s, starting from 1990s, Chinese paleontologists start looking for exact location of those Central Asiatic expedition classic sites. So they found in 2003, in a paper in 2003, they found the exact location of wolf camp. And then in the Gobi Desert, geographic structure is not really, the landscape is not really unique, but they use the little bit ditch in the landscape, and they match that in actual site. So he took took a picture from a wolf camp, and then current wolf camp looks like this. No platypelodon anymore. And if you look closer, this is the one. Can you find the fossils from here? Can you? You know, I did. That's why I took this picture. Here's a fossil. And then here it is, just one gravel. But this is a beaver tooth, an isolated beaver tooth. So now Central Asiatic expedition is over, but we trying to find other animals, the other extinct animals that the Andrews didn't pick up, so that we can reconstruct ancient environments more. And to do so, the small mammals, like mice and rats, if it's a fossils, teeth are only the ones that left. So very hard to find. The beaver teeth is actually the one I show you. It's really large. So what we do is screen washing the deposit and then just get a condensed sands and then looking at that under microscope and pick up fossils. So this is rabbit teeth and me doing a field work in Inner Mongolia. So this is a way how we can get super tiny fossils. Super, super tiny. And then you can see SEM images of one tooth like this. So this one is actually from Inner Mongolia, actual sites that the Andrews visited, but he didn't, the ones he didn't pick up. And then in Japan, you probably know that Japan has lots of earthquakes. It's a very active geological setting, and that means you can barely find the fossils. If it's the vertebrates, probably less opportunities. But in 1993, a guy found this one tooth from Gifu Prefecture. And I was very surprised. The tooth morphology really matches with the one we found from Inner Mongolia. But sure enough, the morphology is a little bit different, and then sure enough, I can find diagnostic character to separate the one on the right side from the left side at the genus level. And I called this year Japan Eonomis. Isn't that cool? So Eonomis is an extinct family of rodents. And since this is very domestic in Japan, I called it Japan Eonomis. So this is how I found a little bit connection with my favorite dinosaur hunter, Roy Chapman Andrews. Japaneomis was like about this size. This is my pets, durable pet, durable pet. Look at this size. So now things are really done different. You have GPS, you have a cell phone, very easy to find an exact location that you found out the years before. But some things are still the same. There's no caved road if you go to the deep in a field. And even a very fancy car like this can get stuck very easily, still. And I found very nice pictures from Central Asiatic expeditions, very much similar. So that's the story of dinosaur hunters. And then this is really my favorite story. So if you want to dig more, and I recommend you to read a book called Dinosaur Hunters. It's a really nice one. So this is it. Thank you very much.
Awesome. We have plenty of time for questions. I didn't explain how the Q&A works. If you have a question, put your hand up. We will give you the microphone. Don and I have microphones. So, is anybody curious about Japanomyces or Eomyces? Yeah.
You made the first move.
Yeah, hand it down.
And I have a request. We have lots of time, but maybe also lots of questions. Please keep the questions short.
That's fine.
Okay.
What's your favorite dinosaur?
Oh, my favorite dinosaurs? My favorite dinosaurs.
That's my question.
Dinosaur is hard. My favorite mammals is keratogores. Do you know the little bit rodent which has a horn like a triceratops? We have that in our museum, National Museum in Ueno. So you might want to come to see it. The dinosaurs, I can't come up with one. Maybe triceratops because it's like keratogores.
That's my favorite too.
Thank you.
Okay, here on the risers.
Hi, thank you for the presentation.
Yeah.
My question, I hope it's not too hard to answer, but I'm wondering, how do you find a site for starting excavating? Like, what takes you to a place then you find like, oh, okay, I should start digging here? Like, what is the thing?
Yeah, so I kind of want to ask the exact same question to paleontologists as well. It's very hard to find. But if it's Japan, there's lots of amateur scientists doing a field work near in their neighborhood. So they found some piece of bones first. Then they probably call the museums and want to find out which animal this belongs to. And the museum finds out, this location have produced a lot of fossils. And then we go there to dig a little more, and perhaps you can get more specimens. So in Hokkaido now, they have almost complete skeletons of hadrosaurs, and then that was also discovered like that. But places like here, you first see geological papers, and then look at if the sediment is what you want to find, like fluvial sediments, because sediments is formed by river. Then start looking at prospecting only on the surface, because it's much easier. And if you find some fragments in bone, that's where that's a place where you want to start digging or looking at more details. So that's how you find fossils.
Here's Mike.
Hello.
Hello.
Great presentation. I just wanted to ask something about Japan dinosaurs as well as some historical animals as well. You said earthquakes and natural disasters just destroy many things on this island, but I'm just curious. Like in Australia, for example, you have so many unique animals and some findings that you cannot find anywhere else, not on the mainland, not on the main continent. Is it the same in Japan? Do you have some very special, unique findings here that you don't find anywhere else?
Yeah, so and different from Australia, Japan is island, but it's still connected to the main continent, and until I cannot really say the exact number, but in a quaternary time, it was still connected. So only those maybe small mammals that came to the island and become isolated, and in a small gene, and became endemic species, and these become pretty endemic. But if it's a large mammal, which can have a very strong dispersal abilities, they can still, since island is still connected to the main Asian continent, they can still move around, and then they hardly become endemic species. But we did have a elephant called the Nauman elephant, Paleoloxodon naumani, and then that was supposed to be domestic, but they start finding similar ones in Asia, in China, so it might not be.
Here.
Thank you for your talk. In some countries, you can go to an association and they will take you to an excursion to find fossils. Do you know if that exists in Japan too? Like for not scientists, but for people like us?
Yeah, there are actually many. If you live in Tokyo, the closest one is probably Saitama, Chichibu. You can actually dig fossils. And if you find like a nice dinosaur bones and teeth, and the museum take them. But if you find the shells and relatively popular fossils, and you can keep it as your own specimens.
Thank you.
To you. Oh, right next to you.
Yeah, I was going to ask basically that question. Like, if someone finds a fossil in Japan, what are they required to do? Like, report it, or can you keep it?
You know what? Since I'm working in a museum, I love to get called. You probably should call Kahaku, National Museum. But and if you talk about the land property and everything, you don't really have to call professionals when you find nice, important fossils. But call me.
Mike to Rod.
Rod.
Oh.
I got to say, you may have displaced Kip as the person whose job I'm most jealous of and want. So, how do you get this kind of job? What do you go get an undergraduate degree in small mammal fossils?
So this is really difficult for me too, because at 7 years old, I was really fascinated by dinosaur. I went to a dinosaur exhibit in Tokyo, and I was really fascinated. But there's no internet information at that time, so I had no idea how to become a paleontologist, especially here. There's no major like that. So I wrote I became, I think I was 5th or 6th grade when Jurassic Park was on a movie. And then I learned, this can be a job. And then this can be a job, so I probably should find this job. So there's another exhibition in Tokyo, and then I just took a note of all the researchers' name, and then I found one guy's email address. So I wrote an email that I want to attend university, which I can learn paleontology. And then I got email back was, no university like that. So in Japan, I did a very basic paleontology in Japan in undergraduate, and then I went to Texas to study dinosaurs. Yeah, Texas is great because there's a very nice dinosaur track everywhere. But from dinosaur to small mammal, it's really interesting. Because of Jurassic Park, there's lots of kids who want to become dinosaur guys. And then I just thought that I couldn't really compete with them. I'm very tiny, even as a girl. And then if there is a big dinosaur bones in front of me, I kind of have to leave that bones and then go to a different fossil locality because this is hard to lift it up. So if it's a feel like Mongolia, if you have very limited automobiles, and then you have to have a certain amount of food, certain amount of equipment, and then you have only limited sheet for people and assistant. And I thought if I were the advisor, I wouldn't take me. I cannot lift up this bone. But if the small mama, it's really, really tiny like this. And then I thought that I can fit in this field, and that's how I started learning rodent fossils more. And I think that was a very nice choice that I made.
Walking back to the risers.
Hello. So I have a question about the Japaniomas. I was just curious, looking at the picture of it, what if there's a closest living relative connection to this animal, like what would that connection be? It kind of looked like a squirrel, but you said it's quite small, so I was just curious.
Yeah, so that's a very nice question. Thank you. So if you, that was only teeth, and I was able to identify at the species level, even just a new genus. And I could do that because rodent, from outside appearance, it's very much similar. Rats, mice, squirrels, everything looks so similar to them. But if you look at the teeth, it's very, very, it's very diverse morphology, and you can identify it even at the species level. So that's why even with one tooth, I was able to identify it as Eomys, the group of Eomys. And the group of Eomys is already extinct. They flourished in Eocene time, just after dinosaur time in North America. They migrated to Europe, and then eventually came to Asia, and then they lived there until Pliocene time, but now it's all extinct. And they are close to pocket gopher. So the closest living was all underground. So I thought it's very interesting because they are probably arboreal animals living in a forest. So it's quite interesting to see how this evolution of their habitat changes this rapidly.
Hi, thanks for the presentation, Yuri. Is there a dream place in the world where you haven't been yet that you would love to go fossil hunting?
You know, I do like to go to Antarctica, South Pole, to find very nice fossils. But also, if I can go to, so there's a Pacific Ocean. What's the other oceans? Atlantic Ocean? So I do like to dig in Atlantic Ocean to find rodents or primate fossil. That's really ridiculous things to do. But if I do that, if I can find it, it's really amazing. Because if you look at the rodents and the primates in South America, those South American taxa looks very small, similar to African taxa. In the phylogeny, they are all quite similar because they are related, and then when Atlantic Ocean before the Atlantic Ocean opened, they could move from the land, right? But if you look at the molecular clocks and find out when this lineages diverged, they probably diverged when Atlantic Ocean was already open. So they have to swim like 1,000 kilometers, really like about 3,000 kilometers, I think 3,000 kilometers, to get from Africa to South America. Or maybe there's some land, temporarily floating islands that takes animal from South Africa to South America, Africa to South America, and then the researchers think that there's probably a floating island which we did that, but there's no solid evidence. So the one thing I want to do is go into Atlantic Ocean to find the rodent teeth and see, hey, this is no evidence for that.
Anybody else? Maybe I can ask a question.
Yeah.
So now you're an experienced paleontologist. When you go back and look at Jurassic Park or the sequels, do they make you angry? Like, this is such crap, or...
I have lots of T-shirts of Jurassic Park. Never make me angry.
Okay. Not for your podcast then, Andrew. Andrew interviews scientists who watched movies that are just wrong, and then they make them angry. So.
Oh, I see. You know what? No, I'm a rodent scientist,
Yeah.
so I cannot really pick up those false.
Okay, so we have to
false
find a movie about
movies.
rodents that can make you angry.
Yeah. But I think I'd love that too.
Any more questions, comments, thoughts, feedback? Back there?
How do they reconstruct the full colored images of dinosaurs just from bones? Like
Okay, so I'm not really familiar with it, but and it's not from the bone. They can actually find the pigment. The pigments, each pigment have a different structure. Melanosome have different structures. If they are fossilized, and then you can compare with the modern colors. Then by morphology, you can say one position is black and the other is blue and then everything. So for an Archaeopteryx, the ancient bird, what they found was black pigments first. So their reconstruction became a total black. Then when they look at the detail, they start finding a white too. So there's a black portion and a white portion for the reconstruction now. But I'm sorry, I'm not really familiar with with details.
Oh yeah, thank you.
Cool. So if there's no other
Going
last
once.
comment? No. Okay.
Going twice.
Going. So your museum, National Museum of Science and Nature, is in Ueno, right?
Yeah.
So that's where they can find you if they're
Yeah,
coming
exactly.
to
And
visit?
I'm located in Tsukuba.
Okay.
But my main museum, my headquarters is in Ueno. So if you Google me, I think you can probably find with my name and a kahaku probably. Then just email me if you find fossils, especially. If you find fossils, especially.
Cool.
Thank you.
Okay, well, I'll be on the lookout for fossils.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Yuri. That was wonderful.
Oh, and also, so our museum is very Japanese-oriented still. If you come to our museum, it's kind of hard to understand how the exhibitions are displayed. There's actually quite a nice specific themes is going on, but it's hard to capture. But I try to do some an English tour later on. So when everything's ready, and I think I'll inform to
Yeah, awesome. We would
grade
love
it.
to hear about
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
and then we'll let everybody know.
Yeah.
So, round of applause for Yuri.
Thank you.
Okay, I've started the clock. We're going to take a 7-minute break. Do what you got to do, nerds. I'll see you back here in 7 minutes. Hey, hey, hey. This is your friendly neighborhood Nerd Night co-boss, Andrew. This is your 2-minute warning. That's what I'm doing. It's your 2-minute warning. So if you haven't got your drink already, now's the time. Run and get it. Be back in your seat, and we're going to start again in 2 minutes. Next up, Chelsea Hostetter. Chelsea is a design researcher and a user interface designer, and she is a general human psychology nerd. She's also working on Hello Rainbow, which is, as I understand, a social application to connect the Tokyo LGBTQ community together for fun, interest-based coffee chats. Since 2004, Chelsea has been a collector and enthusiast of ball-jointed dolls. What are those? Those are fully customizable, articulatable dolls, primarily popular in Japan, Korea, and Taiwan. So let's take a deep dive or a dive into this interesting hobby. Chelsea, take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out to see me and everyone else. All right. As Andrew so kindly said, I'm Chelsea Hostetter. I'm a design researcher and user experience designer, and I've also been a doll hobbyist for over 14 years. So tonight, we're going to be talking about a journey into the uncanny valley of dolls, or why do we find dolls creepy, right? This is a conversation topic that has come up multiple times when people see my dolls, when I interact with people around dolls, and I generally have like a general interest around human psychology and love studying psychology. As somebody who is a user experience designer, it's kind of my job to do so, which is that I study the psychological relationship between people and their objects, which means that as an interaction designer, I come from the field of human-computer interaction, which is humans, computers, how do they interact? And that's essentially the academic field in a nutshell. And so I study a lot of human psychology around objects or how people treat objects. And these are some of the things that I do. I go to conferences, I go to talks, I talk about research, human psychology, the way people behave around software and all sorts of things, as well as illustration. And like you said, so I am making an application right now to connect the LGBTQ community in Tokyo together for 3 to 4 person coffee chats, and it's called Hello Rainbow. So if you're interested in joining and you're part of the queer community, let me know. All that to say, I give you all of this preface to say I'm a totally well-adjusted human being whose bathroom used to look like this when I was 15 years old. This is terrifying. That's a but. Specifically, it's his butt. And I'm just so grateful to my parents who probably walked in on this horror show and they were like, yeah, our daughter's okay. She's okay. She's okay. And definitely, I'm very grateful for the people in my life who I've had the opportunity to talk to about this and have decided that I am not crazy. And this is, my entire presentation is trying to convince you of that. No, it's actually about psychology. But specifically, these dolls are called Asian ball-jointed dolls, or ABJD, which I have such difficulty saying. So why are they called Asian ball-jointed dolls? Well, I mean, they've got ball joints. And so these dolls are fully articulated, which means unlike cloth or paper dolls that sort of like flop over or fold or that sort of thing, they have joints that can move very similar to humans. They have a very wide range of movements, so I can put them in a bunch of different interesting poses. And they're all different pieces strung together by string, which, as you saw in the previous picture, I can take apart and put back together in super creepy ways. So people sometimes ask me, Chelsea, how did you get like this? And to that I respond, well, one time I was at an anime convention, and it always starts there, doesn't it? And I met somebody who had a doll, and this person was super interesting. They were telling me about their doll. They were telling me about the character around their doll, and they said, hey, look at this cool dude. And I said, yeah, that is one cool dude. And specifically, I was really into customization and anime figurines. So I was the kind of person who would build her own model kit Gundams and like paint types of things. And when I realized that these dolls, their eyes can be customized, their faces can be customized, their hair can be customized, pretty much like everything about them is plug and play customizable, I got really excited because I thought this is an amazing opportunity for me to have something that is fully customizable and just something that I can kind of like make my own. So that past picture where you were seeing all the body parts hung up, that was a result of one of my customizations. I was cleaning and sanding the seams of this doll, but I've taken him apart and put him back together so many times. And in recent memory, I actually started doing 3D printing prototyping for the dolls. And so this is a co-owned project that my husband and I did where we thought, you know what would be really cool is to do cybernetic and steampunk arms for dolls. And so this is a first print sort of prototype of this on one of my dolls. And that is when we became small arms dealers. That's good. So these dolls come in many different shapes and sizes, from very, very small to very, very large. So the SD17s on that size is this size right here, this guy. And he's probably on the larger end of like SD13, that sort of thing. I tend towards the larger dolls. I used to have smaller dolls, but they're really difficult to customize, and especially after spending like an hour and a half trying to put an eyeball in a doll's head, you kind of wonder, like, what am I doing with my life? So anyway, Volks is the company that made these dolls, and Volks you might know from hobby trains. They've got like model trains and like paintable, customizable figurines. And Volks was attracting a lot of men into their stores for these model trains, and they thought, man, we're missing a large demographic here, so how can we get women into customization? And this is the answer of what they came up with. And so Volks is just one of many doll companies. So Volks is up here in the upper left-hand corner, and all three of these dolls are Volks made, actually. And all of these are doll companies that I could only hope to buy from. They're amazing, and they come in all sorts of different types and styles. They sort of have like an anime feel to them, but some of them, like that Ippelhaus guy over there, is pretty hunky. But there's a lot of different like ways and shapes in which these dolls take their form, and so your limit is just sort of your imagination, right? So when Volks started making these dolls, they wanted to blend sort of three things together. First was they wanted to blend these Ichimatsu dolls, which are dolls that are generally given to girls to play with, very traditional dolls. And typically, these dolls are for play. So if anyone has grown up sort of feminine gendered, that would be myself. I was given dolls to play with, specifically Barbie dolls, but in general, we're expected to play with these dolls, maybe see them as, kind of children or something like that. And then the next is Hans Bellmer, and specifically, his work is for looking at. So these dolls are meant to be looked at. And Hans Bellmer was a really interesting guy because he was an artist in Nazi Germany, and the Nazis said, all right, all artists within Nazi Germany should be producing things that are relevant to the sort of Nazi agenda. And so he said, I'm going to produce pornography, which was a huge FU to the German state, which was super great and super, that was really an interesting part of him. But the problem is that all of it was sort of based around his cousin, who was like 13 years old, that he had a crush on. So that wasn't a good thing. And in general, when you take a look at his pictures, they're all in black and white, and he handcrafted these dolls. And they're sort of like voyeuristic. You get this kind of like weird feeling where you're like, oh, I shouldn't be looking at this. And then the last thing that they wanted to blend is Volks's wheelhouse is crafting, right? For craft, for customization. So all three of these blend together into what you see here, which are dolls. ABJDs, I also call them dollfies, or doll and figurine merged together. So you might be wondering, as you're looking at this, that the middle picture probably evokes far more creepiness than the rest of them. I don't know how you feel about Ichimatsu dolls, but this one's definitely a creepy one. Actually, there was a PhD paper written in cognitive psychology written on the idea around creepiness. And funnily enough, collecting dolls was considered especially creepy as a hobby. But the second most frequently mentioned creepy hobby involves some variation of watching. So people watching, bird watching, that sort of thing. And in fact, this was actually the highest ranked creepy thing that somebody could do, is to watch a person before interacting with them. So if somebody's watching you and then you notice that they're watching you and then they just don't interact with you and then later come up and say, I was watching you. You can probably feel your skin crawl because I felt it right there, right? And so I thought to myself, why is that? And so just taking a step back, diving into the psychology of it, is there's this thing that some of you might not know called the Uncanny Valley, or Bukimi no Tane. This was developed by a roboticist by the name of Masahiro Mori, and this phenomena is that as something gains human likeness, your affinity for it rises. So by affinity, I mean you want to spend time around it, or you're empathizing with it, or you just generally kind of like it, I guess is the best way of explaining this. And as human likeness goes up, your affinity for it goes up, right? But there comes this point where your affinity goes down, way, way down, to the point where you say, get that away from me. This is super creepy. And then it goes back up into, at this point, you might think that this is sort of like maybe like a dead body or something like that. Zombies also fit this bill, right? And then it will rise again with a healthy person. So let's experience the Uncanny Valley together. All right. So this is Wally. He's super sweet. He's sort of an industrial robot, but by Pixar's standards, he's not super industrial, right? He's got cameras that look like human eyes, and he's got expressions too. You can see that he's looking especially cute right now, and he's going like this, right? So in general, our affinity towards him, and I heard some people go, "Aw," because everyone loves Wally. Next is Pepper. This particular shot of Pepper is very sweet. I've seen some pretty creepy shots of Pepper before, but Pepper in general exists in physical space, is moving around trying to help you with things. Generally kind of helpful. Depends on where you are in this. She might be somewhere here for you. For me, it's just sort of like, oh, that's pretty sweet. Oh no! We've entered the Uncanny Valley. So this is Casper, who is a robot that helps children with autism understand people who are neurotypicals, emotions and reactions to things. So the reason why his face is designed like that is to remove any sort of complexity in the human emotion so that people with autism can say, that's sadness, without having to worry or focus on things like eyebrows or eye contact or things that would otherwise be kind of weird or difficult for somebody with autism to handle. And deeper we go. Yeah, my first reaction to this was like, holy shit. And also like, this is a really, I don't know how else to say this. This sort of feels a little pornographic, like I shouldn't be looking at this picture. So this is actually Sirid, who is a dental robot, and that's the reason why her mouth is so big. Is actually people just pull apart her lips and do dentistry work on it. And my first reaction was, why, Japan? It could have been anything, you know, it could have been just a pair of teeth in a box. But you had to make a person out of it. So this really tweaks the Uncanny Valley for most of us. But like I said, your mileage may vary. You might think that this person looks totally normal and natural. The other thing that Masahiro Mori talks about is this idea of movement with the Uncanny Valley. That movement actually exacerbates the Uncanny Valley. So if you're looking at a stuffed animal and you have like sort of a creepy stuffed animal, it's okay. Like you can deal with it, and the Uncanny Valley will dip a little bit. But things that move tend to dip the Uncanny Valley even more. So for instance, these dolls are not moving, so it's not particularly creeping you out. But like if I had a robot that moved and it didn't have a very like human-like movement, but it had a human face, you'd probably be more creeped out by that. And so this is the reason why if you've ever seen a CGI movie and the CGI stills look just fine, and then when you zoom in on the person's face or they're talking, you're like, that's actually the reason why, is because the Uncanny Valley is triggered more deeply when something is moving. So a lot of people say, oh, I'm creeped out because of the Uncanny Valley, but that's actually not technically correct. The Uncanny Valley is simply a phenomena that has been observed in people. And so the actual psychology behind it is the part that I wanted to get into, which is, why does the Uncanny Valley exist? So there's multiple different theories for why the Uncanny Valley exists in cognitive psychology, but I'm going to tell you the one that I find the most salient or the most interesting is something called mortality salience. So mortality salience is this idea that the more that you confront your own mortality, or the more that you're reminded of your own mortality, the more that you want to remove yourself from the object that reminds you of your own mortality. So day to day, I'm not really thinking about death, but if I encounter something that makes me think about death, I want to move far away from it. And there's a couple of reasons why, which I will explain in this handy diagram. So let's say that I'm a Neanderthal person who is just sort of walking through the woods, and I encounter a dead body. My first thought is like, oh, it's a dead body, right? But there's a lot of reasons why that dead body could be there. One is that the person is sick, and I should stay away from that. Two, something killed it, or something or someone killed it, and I should stay away from that person. Or three, that like something's wrong, or the person's still alive, or they're out for vengeance. So I say, fuck that shit, and I get out of there, right? And mortality salience has actually been really helpful in allowing us to persevere as a human species. And so we want to keep that, right? And so essentially, this idea that we are naturally geared to fear death and naturally geared to avoid things that make us think about death is pretty normal in human psychology. It's just that it gets triggered by things that look like death. So bringing it back to the Uncanny Valley, you have, Wally, who is an industrial robot, doesn't really remind us of death, is just generally pretty cute. To Casper, and then also the dentist android, who definitely remind us of some sort of dead body or some non-living thing, but sort of human. And that's where mortality salience kicks in, and we say, fuck that shit. So mortality salience is different throughout different countries and different cultural contexts. So your cultural perception around mortality salience, your personal experience, and media and film can influence the way that you think about things in a creepy way. So there's sometimes where somebody says, that's creepy, and you say, oh, yeah, I didn't really think about it, but I don't really think of it that way. And these three things, cognitively speaking, and as a designer, we call them our mental model. And our mental model essentially is, this is how things are supposed to be. I think that this is how things are, the sky is blue, and it's supposed to be blue. And so this comes from child psychology. Oh man, I'm gonna fuck up his name, Piaget. And Don Norman in human-computer interaction, my field. So we use the term mental model very frequently when talking about the way a person thinks about something that it should be. You know, if you've ever been using a piece of software or technology that you like had a moment where you're like, I don't think that's right. That's your mental model encountering something different. So when we encounter something different out in the world, you have a moment where you go, I don't know about this. And there's one of two responses that you can do. Well, it's not just two responses. There's a blend of them. But the most extreme response is to just say, fuck that shit. I'm keeping my mental model. That over there can stay over there. And this is typically what happens when somebody sees my dolls and says, man, that's creepy. Because it doesn't really invite any additional exploration, right? And that's creepy is simply a statement, and there's really nothing that I can say to convince other people otherwise, because if someone says it's creepy, then it's creepy, right? But there's no additional exploration that's happening, and there's this sort of mental barrier between this thing that people are presented with and their current mental model. The other thing that can happen is you adopt that mental model and you say, yeah, all right, this seems right. And I think that there's some sort of like blend between the two, which is like, that's creepy for me, but I want to know about it because it's important to you, right? There's a lot of different ways you can do that, but these are the two extremes. So let's bring it back to dolls. All right, so let's talk about my mental model. So I generally fear death. I think many of us do. I generally see death as a taboo, and I don't really like talking about it. I never was around dolls in a negative context as a personal experience. Like nothing ever terrible happened to me. I generally played with dinosaurs and ponies and Barbies sometimes, but it wasn't like in a creepy context. But here's the big one. I've never seen Chucky or any creepy doll movies. And I think that's a big one because it was around high school. And so high school was around that time where I was starting to know about R-rated movies, but like I wasn't there yet. And so I encountered dolls at a really interesting point in my life. So let's go back to the original story that I told you about meeting someone at an anime convention and they said, hey, check out this cool dude. So my first mental model was, yeah, I guess dolls are like kind of creepy, I don't know. But then I met someone who said dolls weren't creepy, and actually they're really cool customizable figurines. And so I had a moment where I said, is this doll creepy? Yeah, all right, like they're not. And, they're actually super hyper customizable figurines, which is really badass, and I want one, right? So I'm gonna tell you a little story about like this fellow right here. His name's Shin. I'll tell you his full name if you're interested. But when I met that person, right after I met that person, I found this doll magazine, and I thought, oh God, these dolls are super beautiful, and I really, really want one, but they're super expensive, so what am I gonna do? And so I waited until graduation, and I told my parents, I really want this doll as like a graduation present, and they're like, really? What are you gonna do with it? But man, they believed in me, and I love that. So I got the doll, and at the time I was really into metallic eyes, but I dressed him up in many different ways. And in high school, I went on to college. And in college, I was in a different state. I didn't have a lot of people that I was interacting with because I didn't, have a lot of friends. And so Shin became this person/doll object that I could talk to about my real feelings while I was making really, really sort of shallow friends at that time. So, in the beginning, I was just hanging out and talking with people. But around the time that I was in college, my grandfather passed away, and I had a lot of really big emotions about it. And that's really not something that you bring up to someone that you just met. And so Shin became this conduit for me to just talk through my emotions by myself. But it helped that there was another person in the room, person, right? That it was just sort of like me processing death, but also through the conduit of something. And Shin in general, I'll get into the sort of, well, actually, let me just continue. So in 2007, I came to Japan for the first time, and I started doing comics. So I was a mangaka at some point, and I started doing comics that actually featured my dolls. And so he became an inspiration, and I did a co-comic with a friend of mine that we eventually sold at Komike that involved Shin. And it was really, really cool because she drew this picture of him, and that makes me feel really, really good that somebody draws pictures of characters that I created. So in the beginning, he was just sort of this psychological aid, but now he became sort of more of a character and more of sort of his own thing. And this is Shin more or less now. His eyes and his features are generally basically set. But what's interesting is that I think his character embodies a lot of things that I wanted to be when I was in high school. And so things like confident, really confident, excited, exuberant, those sorts of things that sometimes I felt I just really didn't have. And so sometimes I think of these dolls as really expensive affirmations where I wake up in the morning and I look at them and I say, yeah, I'm reminding myself to be a better person through this character, which is super fascinating. That's my own personal psychology. The other thing that's really great about just sort of working with the dolls is that I get to go out in nature a lot. A lot of these dolls are photographed in really beautiful natural places, and I also really like hiking and exploring natural areas. And so as sort of an excuse, I'll be all right, I'm gonna take some good pictures of my doll today, and I go out into the wilderness or whatever to just go take pictures. And it's a very sort of ritualistic, wonderful thing where I'm focusing on something super, super detailed and crafty. And over time, I got a lot better at taking photographs, but I visited some natural places that I probably wouldn't have otherwise visited had it not been for them. The other cool thing is that doll owners generally have a sort of knack for customization. So these are all different custom things that you can do with your doll. I particularly like this really, really beautiful sort of Android type doll, but people have done so many amazing things to make dolls personally their own. And I think that's really super cool, just getting back to the customization part and part of the reason why I liked dolls in the first place. So I hope that I changed your mental model just a little bit tonight, and I hope that you understand a little bit more about what makes dolls creepy. Thanks, y'all.
Cool. I think we've got our first question here.
Hi.
Yes.
You mentioned that you were basically using Shin as your a surrogate partner when you were working through your feelings about this. At that time, did Shin already, in your head fiction, so to speak, did Shin already exist as a separate entity from yourself, or were you using it, just a blank canvas? You're just throwing words against the wall, so to speak.
I think that he already existed as sort of a character, when you see them in a human sort of context, I feel I just naturally want to put a personality on them. So he already sort of had a character kind of naturally. And the best part about talking with him is that he gives a different response than myself would to me, which is to say if I were to get down about something, maybe I would get in my head and be like, oh, no, that's no good, that's no good, no, that's no good. But if I ascribe a different personality to an object, then that object actually talks back to me in a very weird and sort of like helpful way.
Okay, questions in the back. But you already asked one, so I'll get someone different.
Hi, I was wondering about this mortality salience theory. So you mentioned that motion actually makes things more uncanny, but that seems to conflict with death being the cause of the uncanniness, because dead things don't move, right?
Well, that's a great point, because dead things aren't supposed to move. And so that's why the idea of mortality salience is so interesting, because when we're talking about things like zombies or talking about things that look like dead bodies but they're moving, then there's like a cognitive disconnect where you're like, it's supposed to be dead but it's moving, but it's out to get me, right? So then not only is mortality very like your own mortality very present, it's actually coming for you, is the way that I would sort of describe it. And so that's part of the reason why moving things are so scary, is because typically you can run away from a dead body, I think, which is that it'll stay put. But if it comes after you, then you can't escape it.
Over here. That actually segs into my question. The three that you've brought with you today are very human-looking and cute and kind. Have you deliberately gone out of your way to make one of your dolls creepy with like a ruined smile or weird eyes, and gone deliberately into that area?
Yes, I have. But it's primarily only to people who annoy me. Just FYI.
So I should annoy you, okay.
Yeah.
Over on your side?
Okay, here we go.
Pick one.
So sorry, back to the death thing.
Yeah.
So you mentioned a lot of kind of humanoid things that are creepy, but is it the same for like plants or animals, things that aren't really human but maybe could be dead or could be alive but not supposed to be?
Yeah. It really, like, as far as like I've seen the uncanny valley present itself in people, like in psychology, that generally it has to have some sort of human-like appearance or like some kind of humanity, which is to say, like, if it's a plant, then it's hard for you to picture it as like a human dead body. But if it's a plant with like, I don't know, like Gary Busey's face on it, then like
nightmares.
Yeah, nightmare. I'm a wonderful person to talk to, so I'm serious. But I think it has to have some level of humanity in order for you to perceive it as dead or alive in terms of human.
Okay, staying in this area right behind the last question asker.
You mentioned one of the other things you mentioned, this creepy, was watching.
Yeah.
I wonder if there's a similar theory, like just as there's the mortality thing for the Uncanny Valley. Is there like a psychological reason for why we find watching creepy?
Yes. It actually goes into detail in that PhD paper that I talked about. So the reason why people find people and other things and watching creepy is not like they dived in deeper to the psychology of it, and it's essentially that you can't predict what the other person is going to do. And so when a person is watching you, they're not interacting with you, they're just watching you. And so there's this sense of like, I don't know if they're watching me to take notes on me. I don't know if they're watching me to just talk to me, or they're nervous. And so like, you can give people the benefit of the doubt, but that sort of like gray area where you don't know how a person's gonna respond to you actually contributes to creepiness.
Amanda, it's on your side of the room.
How about over here?
So this uncanny valley curve, I guess it must be different for every person or every culture, maybe. So, because I look at these Japanese robots and I find them creepy, but apparently somebody built these and thought they are very nice robots. So is there any research on how this curve differs for different cultures?
So Yes, the short answer is yes. I would, if you're interested in that, I would actually look into Genevieve Bell's work. She's an anthropologist that works in tech, and she's studied many different cultures' reactions to technology. She's a super interesting person and one of my fave heroes.
Let's take one more. How about Rod?
So you brought 3 people with you here.
Dolls, yes.
Yeah. How do numbers affect our reaction? And would 10 dolls that are different be different than 10 dolls that are all the same?
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, my first reaction was like, why would I buy all dolls that are the same? So I think that I'm just gonna like say an anecdote that somebody told me, which was that if people have a collection of dolls, if people have a doll room, it's not as creepy as having a room with one doll in it. So I really like that because context matters, right? So like I brought these 3 today just to illustrate to you the difference of the different types of dolls. And it's possible that 10 lined up would be very creepy, but the other thing is like in the context, I'm explaining these dolls, right? But if for no apparent reason, 10 dolls were lined up here, people would be like, what the fuck? So yeah, context matters.
I think we're going to end there, but please come and chat with Chelsea and check out her dolls and be gentle with them. Let's give her another hand.
Don't stop.
Hey, it's me again. Another 7-minute break. Do your stuff. Come back in 7 minutes. I'll see you then.
Don't stop.
Hey, are you ready? Because you've got just 2 minutes to get back in your seat and catch the last talk of the evening. Get that drink, take that pee. 2 minutes.
Stop.
Corey is from Atlanta, Georgia. This is Outcast that we're listening to. He received his PhD from Waseda University in September, and prior to that, he spent 5 years developing new treatment methods for problematic radioactive wastes. He has won national and international titles in several martial arts, but tonight he's going to give us a massive roundhouse kick to the head with the reality of the climate disaster. If it's too depressing, you know what to do. Have a drink. Maybe at the bar, if they're nice, they'll give you one more if you're depressed. But also listen up. It's an important topic. So Corey, the floor is yours.
Okay, yeah. Yes, so I just want to thank the organizers. It's been a really fun night, and apologize ahead of time for killing the mood. But yeah, so I developed negative emissions technologies. These basically are ways to take CO2 out of the atmosphere. And the most apt analogy I can think of is pumping your stomach to not die from alcohol poisoning. Here, we're trying to take CO2 out of the atmosphere so that we don't collapse civilization due to climate change. So tonight, I'm going to try to make you personally care about climate change, and then we're going to look at what is it about civilization that leads to climate change, and what are some of the things we can do to fix that. And then we're going to come to the unfortunate conclusion that we need these negative emissions technologies, and we're going to look at what some of our options are. So these are a few of the climate change impacts. They've already started. They're going to get worse, but a lot of these are kind of euphemistic, like drought. So these are like the impacts, right? People are going to die. A lot of people are going to die and suffer, okay? But even still, it's not quite personal yet, so we're going to look at just one of them. So heat death. So what this map is showing is the number of days of the year that it's too hot for people to go outside. It's too hot and it's too humid. You can't cool down by sweating. And in the 1990s, you can see that a few places in the globe, there was, maybe a month or two out of the year that there was a chance of heat death. Now, when we talk about climate change, we're talking about potential futures. The future, what will the future be like if we do X or Y or Z? So what all the politicians say that they want is the temperature is not going to go above 2 degrees. Even then, you can see parts of like South Asia are, struggling. It's not nice. But if you look at what each individual country actually promises to do and you add it up, it's actually 3 to 5 degrees temperature increase. And then if you say, well, what are countries actually doing? Not what they're promising, what are they actually doing? It's a 4 to 6 degree temperature increase. And then you can see, look, like Indonesia, every day it's too hot to go outside. Too hot, you're gonna die. So you might have the question of, well, how can a few degrees lead to heat death, right? Like the summer is 30 degrees hotter than the winter, like what's going on here? When you hear a 2 degree temperature increase, that's the average temperature over the whole surface of the planet. So the land and the oceans. And the land heats up a lot more than the oceans. And then that heating is not evenly distributed. The poles heat up more than the equator. So this is an average 2 degrees temperature increase, and you can see Northern Europe is like 7 to 7.5 degrees above average. But even this is hiding the effect a little bit because this is the average over a whole year, and there are these things called heat waves. This is a heat wave from last year. And India and Pakistan experienced 50 degrees C temperature for a couple weeks. Okay? At that point, civilization shuts down. This is last year, so like 1.1 degrees temperature increase. So you can start to imagine 2, 3, 4, 5. Like, what is the world going to be like? But climate change has a lot of ways it can kill you, and this is just one. So if you want to learn about those different ways, come talk to me. I'll be happy. The other thing to keep in mind is if it's your city that gets hit by the hurricane, if it's your house that gets destroyed, if it's your family that dies, it's not reassuring that society as a whole is still going on. Okay, so try to personalize and internalize these impacts. So we know we have a problem, right? This is a problem. So to understand the problem, you need to know that the temperature increase is basically linearly associated to the total amount of CO2 that's been released. So you can say, I don't want to go above this temperature, then you know exactly how much CO2 can be released. So where are we on this path? Well, right now we're about halfway to a 2 degree temperature increase, which might sound like, okay, well, we got a little bit of time. Does everyone remember 1990? 1990, Ichiro started playing baseball, and MC Hammer was doing his thing, and there was half as much CO2 that had been released by humans. Half of the problem has come in the last 30 years. And if you look 10 years from now, we'll be at over 1.5 degrees C. 10 years from there, 2 degrees C. So you can see we're accelerating towards catastrophe. So this is what we need to do. It's simple, okay? Reduce emissions now. Not next week, not next year, now. And as a whole race, as a whole species, we have to get to 0 CO2 as a society. That's all we have to do. To do that, we need to know where are these sources of CO2 in our daily lives. And what I'm showing here are the sources. So power production and transportation and agriculture. And it's not just carbon dioxide. There are other greenhouse gases like methane. If we lump all these together, we're emitting about 53 gigatons of CO2, 53 billion tons of CO2 every year. Actually, that's not true. This is from 2016. 2017, we released more than 2016. 2018, more than 2017. And the numbers for 2019 came out just a few days ago, and we beat it again. So this is too low. We're actually more than this now, but okay, 53 billion tons. And we need to get this number to 0, right? I know what to do. We're going to electrify everything in renewable energy. So you get a solar panel, and you get a windmill, and you get an electric vehicle. So I want you to think in your head, if we do that, everything electric and super highly efficient, what is this number going to go to? Get a number in your head? It's probably wrong. It's probably wrong. We still have 40% of our problem left over. Okay, I know what to do. It's been in the news. Impossible Burger, right? We're going all vegan. We're going to restore all the wildlife. And by the way, if you want to go overseas, can't do that on an airplane anymore. And if you want to buy something from overseas, can't have it because there's no more international shipping. Okay, what's that number going to go to? Get another number in your head. What's it going to? This time you're worried. I know you're worried. We still have 8 billion tons left over. What is this? This is from making stuff. So making iron and steel, making cement, chemicals, glass, okay? So here's a fundamental problem, right? We have to rework our whole civilization. Completely new power infrastructure, transportation, everything has to be new, and you can't have any new material to do it. Okay, now this is not a new problem. We've known about this for decades, and this is the purview of politicians, right? This is what they're supposed to do. Think about these big problems and fix them. Okay, so what have they come up with? Negative emissions. Take the CO2 that's already in the air and take it out of the air. It's that simple. I want to just emphasize, this idea did not come from physicists or engineers or biologists. It came from macroeconomics. So we have, yes, woo! You can do a lot of crazy things in an economic model. We've bet civilization on neoliberal macroeconomics. So just sit on that for a second. Okay, but here's what they say. Here are our past emissions, and this black line is what our emissions need to do going into the future to stay below 1.5 degrees Celsius. Now, you can do this analysis for 2 degrees C or 3 degrees C. It doesn't change the message, okay? Now, as we delay our emissions reductions, as this black line goes to the right, we need more and more of this green stuff at the bottom, which will come up, is the negative emissions. Now, politicians love this because what this is really saying is, I don't have to start my diet now. I can start my diet next month because I heard next month there's going to be a magic pill that burns the fat right off my body. And then, like, people like me who have to make this magic pill are like, no, man. No, it's eat your broccoli and exercise. It's reduce emissions is the magic pill. But, okay, here we are. We need these negative emissions. So assume we do everything right. You know, we talked about before all the things we need to do. Assume we do everything right. And assume that there are no climate feedbacks, right? So climate feedbacks are like environment stops taking in CO2 and starts releasing CO2 that it was holding. So you can think about it as like Mother Nature just being like, no, fuck you, I've had enough, you're out of here, okay? But assume we don't have those, okay? No climate feedbacks. We need 10 to 20 billion tons of CO2 to be removed from the atmosphere every year. I don't know, there are like 7 to 8 billion people, so maybe we can do that. I don't know, is that a lot? That's the same as the total productive capacity of all the plants and oceans on the planet. We just need another planet. Just throw all of our shit into the other planet and we're good. So right now you might be feeling like this, and that is the correct feeling. That is a Dr. Corey approved feeling. Like, this is not a good situation that we're in. So this is what negative emissions are. Relying on negative emissions are basically like a crime against humanity, okay? But politicians have relied on it so long that now we actually do need them. Okay, that's the sad situation. Okay, so what do we have? What are our options? First of all, you'll hear about some of these things as being negative emissions, and they are definitely not. CO2 utilization or CO2 reuse. Take carbon dioxide and turn it into something that people want to buy, okay? But these things turn back into carbon dioxide really quickly. So like you took it out of the air and turned it into gasoline and you put it in your car and then you burn it and then it goes back into the air. Not negative emissions. Geoengineering. We're going to throw a bunch of dust up into the air to reflect the sunlight and it's going to cool down the planet. We actually don't know how the physics of that work really well. And it doesn't solve all the issues with climate change. It doesn't solve ocean acidification, for example. Okay, the thing that, now we'll get to real negative emissions. The thing that we should definitely do, no-brainer do, is like let nature go back to being nature. Okay, so we've destroyed a lot of ecosystems, which has reduced the amount of carbon that's being held in the ecosystems, but it's not enough. Why? So we had our nice ecosystem, and we kind of kicked it around. At the same time, we also took a bunch of fossil fuels that were underground not doing anything and burned them and released the CO2 in the air. So if we recover our natural ecosystems, we still have that CO2 that we've taken from underground, okay? So long and short of it is definitely replant forest and restore the wilderness. Definitely do that, but it's not enough, okay? The most popular negative emissions technology is called biomass energy with CO2 capture and storage, or BECCS. Conceptually, trees take CO2 out of the atmosphere. So we could burn those trees in a power plant, make energy, catch the CO2 from burning them, and put the CO2 underground. So we've taken CO2 from the air and put it underground, which sounds great. But ecosystems are systems. So you cut down a tree, and you didn't just affect the tree. There's a whole ecosystem in the soil and the surrounding vegetation that gets affected. And when you cut down the tree, that ends up with a lot of CO2 that's released from the environment. On top of that, when you cut down the tree, it's no longer taking CO2 out of the air. So you say, well, I'll just plant another tree. That small tree is not pulling as much CO2 as the large tree. So these are usually not negative emissions. And there are other issues, like it takes the land area of India to do this, which sounds like a lot. It would be a lot if it was true, but it's not true. It actually takes 3 Indias worth of land to do this. So it's just don't do this. The reason this is popular, though, is because it uses existing technology and existing infrastructure, and economists and politicians love that. But not a good idea. Now, the second most popular one is called direct air capture and storage. So instead of a tree, we're going to have a machine, and it basically filters CO2 out of the air, and then you put that CO2 underground. These exist. So this one is in Canada, and this one is in Switzerland. I visited last year. They're still really small scale. They exist. They have technical issues, but those seem solvable. The problem is they're expensive, which means you need governments to pay for it, either directly or with a carbon tax or something like that. Which means you need political will. Climate scientists have been trying to get politicians to move on this for 60 years, and the problem has gotten worse and worse and worse. So this doesn't exist, okay? This does not exist. There's 2 ways it exists. One, enough people get pissed off enough that the politicians have to move. So Sunrise Movement, Extinction Rebellion, Greta Thunberg, that's a possibility. The other possibility is to just bypass this and somehow make money. If you make money, you can bypass the political problem. So I'm going to talk about how to make money while taking CO2 out of the air by looking at when the dinosaurs were around, which seems weird. But when the dinosaurs were around, there was 2 to 4 times as much CO2 in the air. Where did it go? It turned into rocks. Okay, it turned into calcium carbonate and magnesium carbonate. And then it stays there. It's stable. And this process is called weathering. Problem is it takes a long time. So there's a suite of technologies that look at accelerating this process, and they're called enhanced weathering. It's a genius name. So I've developed one of those, which I call direct air mineralization. And you take rocks, you grind up the rocks, you blow air over the rocks, and then you sell the rocks as rocks, which sounds stupid. I know, it sounds stupid, but rocks are the largest market in the world by mass. So all this concrete, 70 to 90% rocks. When you go home tonight, if you look down on the sidewalk on the road, it's just rocks that are kind of glued together with a little bit of other stuff. Largest market in the world, after water, largest market in the world. Okay, so this works. We're doing this. It usually takes a long time, and you can't just use any rocks. So don't go home and just start breaking some rocks. You're not it won't hurt anything, but you're not helping the climate problem. So let's look at Japan. Japan has rocks. They They have very nice rocks. This is southern Japan. This is Sakuradojima. This is where I got married. You can see it's an active volcano. It's going off right there. There's me and my beautiful wife getting married. Anyways, the other nice thing about southern Japan is they have excellent rocks for reacting with CO2. So over the next 3 hours, I'm going to explain why these, we got good rocks in Japan, okay? Just believe me. But it's not just that simple, right? So you gotta look like how fast do the different types of rocks react, and like, well, if I'm grinding them up, like what's the grinding energy, and like where am I getting that energy from, and like what happens during the reaction process, and oh, if I have to remove like some dirt and forest, like I'm destroying the environment, and what are the effects of that, and like, but like breaking rocks is the oldest human technology, right? So like, but if you do all this analysis, you can get a PhD, so, okay. Now, how many rocks do we need? So if you remember that biomass energy technology needed 3 Indias worth of land. So here's a map of Japan. If we want to do all of the negative emissions in Japan, how much of this area is it going to take? Just get an idea in your head. I'm actually already showing you. There are a bunch of little red dots, which you can't see. I'm going to put them together. It's that much area. So doable. Problems. If we do this with demolition waste, when you knock down a building, you can do the same process with the like rubble that's left over. But when you do it with rocks, it still costs a lot of money. So we're back at that political will issue. But there is another way. So do you remember what we were trying to make? We were trying to make calcium carbonate and magnesium carbonate. So we need calcium and magnesium. Okay, so there's another place that has calcium and magnesium besides rocks. It's the ocean. The ocean has a lot of it, okay? So I've developed another process, which is you take salty water and you evaporate it until you just have salt. And then you take the magnesium salt, nigari, it's used when you make tofu. You heat that up, it becomes magnesium oxide, and then it reacts with CO2 in the air. Now, when you do this, nice thing, you can do this process in a couple hours. Okay, and you make things. You make, besides reducing CO2, you make water. You also make aggregate. You make, actually a number of different salts come out, so you make a number of different products. So you can make a profit while also reducing CO2. I was told I was being too nerdy for Nerd Night, so this is the process. If you want to know the details, come talk to me. It's patented in Japan, but it isn't patented somewhere else, so jump on that. Okay, but to close, don't get excited. No negative emissions technology exists at even 1/10,000th of the scale needed. And even if it did, and we could scale up and spread that technology as fast as any technology has ever spread on the face of the planet, we would still need the rest of society to go to zero CO2 like now, okay? So what I'm trying to tell you is this is not like a techno-fix problem. This is an all-society fix problem. And we need, we need artists and writers to like help move our culture in a way where we're all thinking more sustainably and thinking about equity, for people who aren't directly in our lives. And we need politicians and economists to rethink value. What's the value of GDP versus the value of a stable civilization, or of human suffering versus happiness? So I'm sure everyone here has your specialty and some excellent skill for your area, and I'm pleading for you to just quit what you're doing and put that towards this problem, because it's an all hands on deck situation. And if you didn't know that before tonight, it's fine, it's not your fault, but you know now. So I hope you join me in this fight. So if you want to contact me, my information's at the top. If you want to get up to speed on climate change, I recommend these things, of your media of choice. So thank you.
Okay, who has a burning, not to put a pun on it, Don, question?
So assuming that most of carbon emission comes from developed countries,
Yeah.
can we let the anti-vaxxers do their thing and reduce population in those countries, which
Yeah.
then lowers our annual CO2 production?
Okay, so actually, this is not crazy. So there was a slide I had, and I took it out for time reasons. If you say like how much CO2 are the different people in the world releasing, and you separate it by the wealth of the individuals, so not countries, but wealth. The 10% wealthiest people on the planet are responsible for half of the CO2 emissions. So I put up their tax/eat the rich, but literally if we start eating the rich from the richest person in like a descending order, like that solves a problem quicker than anything else. So it's not that crazy of an idea, actually.
And as a bonus, we can keep an otherwise vegan lifestyle and reduce.
Yeah.
Elon Musk burger on the menu.
Yeah, he's got a lot of emissions.
Other serious or semi-serious questions?
Ian has a question?
No, I was just thinking Jeff Bezos doesn't look very yummy to me.
I know, right?
Okay, we have a question down here on the right.
I can put basically the same question differently.
Yeah.
How many people want to die with the most toys?
Yeah. So there's a lot of ways to look at it. You know, it's odd that we'll help somebody who's right next to us, but we'll let somebody in a poor country die without. I mean, people will like run down the street to give you back, you know, whatever, like 100 yen that you dropped, but they won't prevent a child from dying in India. To the Koch brothers? Okay. Yeah, I mean, they want a lot of toys. So this is... Okay. Well, I mean, so there are sociopaths. They're, you know, just reality of humans. You know.
Okay, and question right here.
And then next here.
Thank you for the presentation.
Yeah, thank you.
I think it was the DAX system.
Direct air capture, yeah.
You stated that they have to be very large. Is that because they have to be large to be effective, or is there a reason that they physically have to be large?
Oh, are you talking about the amount of area they take up?
Well, you made the statement that one of the reasons that they're, they take a lot of, they're expensive and they take government support and they're large. I think you said they were large, or needed to be large.
Well, okay, so another way to put this is like if you can imagine the Grand Canyon, okay, it's big. That's all you need to imagine. If you took all the air in the Grand Canyon, it has like about 3 million tons worth of CO2. And so every year we need to pull out 3,000 times worth of that, of CO2. So we have to move a lot of air. So regardless of the system that's used, I mean, any of the systems, requires moving a lot of air because CO2 is so dilute in the air. So you want to take a huge amount of material from a very dilute source. Everything's going to be large.
I'm loving so much about what you said. First of all, artists, bringing them in. You know, it seems like we've all been in these little sectors and silos, and the brilliant information, the critical information has not been getting out over the last 60 years. I'm from the US. It's insane, the delusion that's going on there because of anyway, I'll try to make this short. Okay, so COP25 is going on right now. Got a few colleagues there. Curious what your thoughts are on that, and how to move political will, how to leverage the Olympics. You know, there's like 3.5 billion people watching that. There's 3.5 billion people on Facebook.
Yeah.
This is the most critical issue on the planet for life on Earth.
Yeah.
WTF?
Yeah.
What to do?
Yeah. So the best thing individuals can do is to be politically active. And frankly, the existing political structures have failed for a long time. Like, just empirically, they've failed. So these primarily youth movements that are trying to disrupt everyday life to get the climate change as being a big issue. So Extinction Rebellion, Sunrise Movement, Fridays for Our Future, this is really the best thing. Because if the politicians can kind of like make it not an issue, they won't act on it. They don't want to do anything on it. So fundamentally, we're at the point where we need a lot of people to disrupt daily life to make it an issue. So Olympics, if there were widespread protests like there have been in the UK during the Olympics, you would see more movement from politicians.
We have another question on the right.
So one of the issues with mineralization of carbon is that it uses up oxygen. So there's a risk of the atmosphere becoming unbreathable. Will there be a follow-up talk how to get oxygen out of rocks?
First, 2 points on that. One, you could kill all of the plant life and all of the plant life in the oceans as well, and we would still have enough oxygen for longer than human civilization. So that's not an issue. But CO2 mineralization doesn't use up oxygen. The oxygen is there. You have a magnesium oxide or calcium oxide, and it already has oxygen with it. And then the CO2 binds to it, so it's not actually using up oxygen.
Yeah, okay. Let's take one over here. We haven't gotten this side of the room.
Thank you. So very simple question.
Yeah.
So what I understand is, do we need to consume the magnesium salt?
Okay. Do we need to consume like as individuals or like as a society or? Okay. So there's so much magnesium in the oceans that if we burned all fossil fuels and then converted all of that CO2 into magnesium carbonate using magnesium in the ocean, the amount of magnesium in the ocean would be reduced by 0.4 or 5%. So the ocean wouldn't notice it. So it's not an issue of magnesium resources. There's enough. Yeah.
Okay. There's a question in the second row.
Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation. And I think the most important thing is we have to start. So, of course, I wonder if this is really feasible to achieve 53, how much was gigatons?
Yeah.
I mean, any significant value, because first you start with some demonstrator that has some kilograms or and so on. So I think it's a huge task. And of course, what came to my mind was the salt price may crash down if you have an oversupply of salt. So,
okay, excellent.
So
excellent
basically,
questions.
the whole economic model might be difficult, but anyway, it's good to start.
So these are excellent questions. So 53 gigatons, the vast majority of that is changing the current infrastructure and the current power systems. But that, we hear so much about renewable energy and it is booming, and yet it hasn't made any change in the amount of fossil fuels that are being burned. So this is a huge issue. That's why we can't depend on these negative emissions. We have to change everything else. If we do these negative emissions technologies and we're making these magnesium carbonates, the nice thing about the rock market is it's bigger than the CO2 problem. It's the only market that's bigger. It's the only market where you could use carbon that's bigger than the amount of carbon that's released. But the brine-based system I showed at the very end also makes water. And that's the key point, that instead of relying on selling rocks, water is a much better and larger market and more valuable. But excellent points.
Maybe.
Thanks. I have several, maybe one. You said none of these negative technologies exist at even a thousandth or 10
One
thousandths of
10,000th of the
that
needed scale.
required.
Yeah.
Let's say the one that you showed about the ocean. What would it take to get the prototype that you showed and put it at a scale that, let's say, covers just
Fantastic
Japan?
question. I'm going to pay you later. Okay. So here's the thing. I said like evaporate salty water. So there's already desalination plants that take ocean water, they make drinking water, and then they make brine, super salty water. Okay, that exists right now. So if we limit ourselves to using that, it's already somewhat concentrated, and we only use that. To 20, there are projections for the desalination market to 2050. We have enough negative emissions to 2050. There's so much of this brine that's already being made. Right now, it's just dumped into the ocean, which has negative effects on ocean life. So you would also be treating that environmental waste. But all the other methods in existence, so the rocks method, you could do it. It wouldn't be tough, but it would take a huge amount of government money. The same thing for the direct air capture. So technologically speaking, doable. But as the last person said, scaling the technology and spreading the technology. If you look at the timescales of technology spread, it's too long compared to our situation. But the desalination one is a possibility. So, but don't get excited. Don't get excited.
Okay, we have time for one more very, very short question.
It's a little bit tangential, but if you know, among the sort of renewable energy sources we have, is there any? So which ones are like promising to you, and which one doesn't do not make sense? Because for instance, the solar panels they only make sense where the coals are cheap to produce. And then also, for instance, another example is that hydro plant reported to cause fair amount of CO2 as the plants get submerged in rock. So which ones are?
So it's definitely geography dependent. So where you are matters. But in terms of like what's exciting to me is solar panel prices are dropping so dramatically, and battery prices are dropping so dramatically that you can overbuild to a stupid extent. You can build way more solar panels than seems reasonable. And so that's really exciting. And then also the wind power is getting to much higher heights where we have a much steadier wind flow. And so the capacity factor means how much of the time those turbines are making energy is like a crazy high number, much higher than you would expect. So solar power, batteries, wind power, super exciting. In certain locations, the pump hydropower is good. But it depends on where you are, you know?
Okay. All right. Okay. Abrupt ending, but we're running out of time. Thank you for the inspiring talk. I hope everybody has some food for thought to take home. Let's thank Corey and all the other speakers.
Hey, here I am. I'm back. Oh, my voice. My voice not back, though. On behalf of myself and the whole Nerd Nite team, I'd like to thank our three speakers, Yuki, Chelsea, and Corey, for their talks tonight. Thanks, guys. Even though that happened like months ago, but thank you for letting us record those and use those. Speaking of the Nerd Nite team, just thanks to those guys too for always being there. Hey, Nerd Nite team, I miss you. I do not like to be socially distanced from you. I don't think that's a word. And of course, thanks to Amanda, who keeps this whole thing rolling. Nerd Nite, not possible without her. As I said at the top of the show, looks like we'll see you next month again online, and fingers crossed we'll be back in person in the flesh at Grid in May. Okay. Oh, look at that. I still have a drink left. Actually, it's not the same one. This is blueberry, this one. In the Nerd Nite beaker. Nerd Nite Tokyo beaker. Yeah. Cheers, nerds. Over and out.